Gentlemen, it is not too late to sign up for the 100 Great 100 Consecutive Push-Up Challenge, which kicks off on January 1st and runs for the first 60 days of this year. We have hundreds of men around the world who are training to do 100 consecutive push-ups in a row by training the body and mind to push past the edges of what you thought possible. Now, the 60-day challenge is only 20 minutes of training per day, physically and mentally. And even if the idea of doing 100 consecutive push-ups in a row sounds impossible to you, I can promise you two things. From having run this challenge many times before, the first promise I can make to you is that you will do more push-ups than you ever thought possible. And the second thing is, you will shatter ceilings and limitations that your inner critic had put in place that will allow you to feel the sense of, I am so much more capable than I ever gave myself credit for. And that feeling of confidence and that awareness will translate into every other area of importance in your life. In the show notes, there is a link to join us for this challenge, and it is a free challenge. So for 60 days, you have the opportunity to be a part of a group of men training your mind and your body to know no limits. If you've been looking for something to do to kickstart your year, this is the thing. And all of the details are in the link in the show notes. Sign up now, and we will see you there on January 1st. Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
Well, here we are at the very end of our 13-week journey in the Building Your Best Self series. And also at our final episode of 2021. So this moment calls for something special, something to ignite your fire, something that speaks to your soul, calling for you to rise up as a man and ascend into your highest self. So I bring to you a special man, one of our brothers in the Great Man Within community who has a particular gift for alchemizing words into medicine with his poetry. In fact, he's written a poem especially for you, the listeners of this podcast, as a wake-up call and an invitation for you to step into something bigger. That man's name is Robert Joseph. Now, Robert is a leader of men. He coaches men and he runs his own men's group called Raised by Men. Robert is one of the original members of Great Man Mastermind 1.0, and he's a beloved brother whose gift of poetry was something that he'd kept hidden from the world for 4 decades until he found the courage inside of our mastermind to share his gift for the first time in a public way. And in so doing, he blew all of us away. And now he's no longer hiding that gift. He's sharing it with the world. And today he'll be sharing 3 poems sourced directly from his heart, speaking directly to your soul. And spoiler alert, expect some goosebumps and some chills. Now, Brian had a scheduling conflict with this recording. He sends his regards. So stepping in once again is fan favorite Keith Bracci, another one of the leaders in our Great Man Mastermind community who's making his 4th or 5th appearance on the show. I know you guys love him, so he's back here today. Prepare to be inspired in this episode, the final episode of our 13-week Building Your Best Self series and the final episode of 2021, A Call for Men to Rise, featuring Robert Joseph. We have a special episode today because of the cast of characters who are joining me here today. We do not have Brian, who is sending his regards, but we do have the Gabagool, the Stugotz, Mr. Extra Medium himself, Keith Bracci Brajol. Welcome back to the show, buddy.
I got to put that on the business card. Extra medium himself. It's the new title. I may name, my phone that and everything.
And if someone asks you what the extra medium is, if they go one layer deep with that, you're out of there, man.
Good point.
And a special first-time appearance by one of the men in our Mastermind 1.0, a brother who needs no introduction in our circles, but who's not been on the podcast yet. Robert Joseph, the poet himself. Welcome, brother.
The man.
There's all the nicknames. I want the nicknames like Keith has.
Do you though?
Is extra large taken?
Good point.
Okay.
We'll save that one for you.
Extra large, Robert Joseph. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Happy to be here, Dom. Thanks for having me.
One of the things that we love about you is in the Mastermind, you have these secret talents that you just didn't really share with the rest of the world, with our group for over a year. And one of those talents is you're a world-class poet. We're going to be sharing some of your skills. You've written 3 poems that you're going to be sharing on this podcast as can openers for us to have deeper discussions around, men who want to define their own masculinity, break free from the man box, define their own terms of, what it means to be a man. So you've got 3 poems lined up for us. And one of them you wrote specifically for our audience. Isn't that true?
Yeah, a little special treat for the listeners today.
That's amazing.
Yeah, happy to lead with that. It's funny, though, you say that about a talent. 2 things come to mind is, first of all, I never really recognized it as a talent. I guess that inner critic that's always going, right? You're not good enough. And then secondly, sharing it. Like as a man, the idea of sharing poems with 20 other men, or today maybe hundreds or thousands of men, just wasn't something I even fathomed. It would scare the hell out of me. So this is a new endeavor, not writing them, but sharing them.
Yeah, this is how Keith and I came to learn that you were a poet. We've been in Mastermind 1.0 for 428 days at this point. We were in Austin, Texas for our very first in-person immersion. And the reason why we know it was 428 days was because I counted how many days we had to do Zoom calls, during the pandemic before we got together in person. We had 3 days with these 21 guys, which were out of this world. And I'm literally wrapping up the immersion. We just finished our 3 days, tugged on heartstrings, went deep together, played games, did all the things. And right when we are like the buzzer's about to go off, Robert stands up and is just like, "Hey man, I wrote a little poem for this crew and I wanted to know if I could read it for you guys." And Keith, maybe I'll come to you and just get your recollection of that story. But the way that it went down for me was Robert stepped up and he read the words that you'll hear today. He's going to save it for our final poem, but it brought the fucking house down. Like after he finished his final word, all 20 guys jumped up off their feet and stormed him and gave him this big bear hug. It was incredible. What was your recollection of that experience, man?
Yeah, it was unbelievable. Robert is exactly how you're describing, where just constant nuggets of surprise, where I remember early on we're doing the Zoom calls and Robert's just this guy in a little box on my screen in some dark room. I could barely freaking see him, in some cool sweater and a cool beard, and whatever, there's 21 guys, you get an hour. There's not a lot of time to get to know each other all that well. And then after the first time we got together, met this guy. I'm just like, this guy's fucking amazing, man. It's magnetism. I'm fucking instantly drawn to this guy. And then speaking to him, I'm like, when you just know this is your brother, this guy, he's your boy for life, love, and constantly get surprised by his abilities and his caring and his power. And he leads men, the work he does with people, and the pillar he's become in our circle has been just phenomenal to watch.
Well said, man.
Man, I appreciate those kind words. And the feeling's mutual, my only regret is not meeting you guys earlier in life. Remember when sleepovers were cool? I wish I knew you guys then, staying up all night, looking at our father's Playboy, playing Nintendo, all that.
Totally.
Nice.
Well, Robert, man, before we go into your first poem, why don't you give our listeners a lay of the land for who you are in the world right now and, some of the work that you're creating as you're building the man that you want to become in the years ahead?
Yeah, I started off as a life coach. And by day, I'm in cybersecurity. I do sales, and that's slowly dwindling. And my passion is working with men and now women, which is sort of this new transition or addition to my work. But, I started off as a men's coach working one-on-one with men. Now I'm running men's groups and men's retreats, and I'm building some property in upstate New York, a healing center for everyone that needs help. A lot of the context of the poems today, we'll talk about like some of the struggles that men have, men's health being a really important topic that not many people are talking about, right? And it's finally getting its due time and its justice. So working with men, working with women, yes, about, being vulnerable and being your best self and living on your edge, but also really with reconnecting with your truth, reconnecting with your divinity. My spirituality is very, very important to me. And I want to share what I've learned and the process that I've used to help people return to God and return to their heart. And again, what you'll hear in these poems is a lot of that undertone. But really what's more important is when I write, and I didn't realize this till recently, it's not really me. I think anyone who's artistic could attest to this. Something just comes through me, and I don't even remember writing things, to be honest. I mean, I read a screenplay. I found it in my inbox last night because I was looking for something else. I wrote a screenplay about 4 years ago, and I reread it last night. It was 100 pages. I don't remember any of it. I don't remember writing it. Conversely, there was a time when I was looking for a screenplay for weeks, tearing my apartment apart. And then I realized I never wrote the screenplay. It was just a figment of my imagination. So stuff is really, it just comes through me, and I allow it to come through because I'm clearing my channel on a daily basis. And it feels good to be aligned with that creativity.
And you're gifted at that too, man. So why don't you lay on us the first poem that you said you wrote specifically? Now, you surprised both Keith and I. Like, we thought you were coming here to share the two poems that we'd already heard before, which we both loved. But you got a third one that you wrote specifically for our listeners. So why don't you kick it off with that one, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is for the Great Man listeners. So here we go. I'm just going to jump right in. For the listeners out there, you found what some might call a podcast, but is really a portal to level up your existence. See, what you find and how you find it is never a coincidence. For this is just God being playful, his way of remaining anonymous, because you are here in this moment being called to help raise the collective consciousness. There is no need to suffer in silence anymore. The brotherhoods are uniting. The shame and fear is subsiding. The lone wolves are coming out of hiding. The powers that be want us fighting because men are a lot more powerful together than apart, and we are no longer abiding. To carrying the burden alone and pretending that all is fine when our insides need to be cleaned so we could align with a purpose that is bigger than us and our own pain, because change is a fool's game when everyone else is to blame. So you are the change that proclaims from mountains, the hills, the plains, that you are more than your name, your country, your race, and your religious belief. You are a man stripped to his core that no longer subscribes to the motif that men don't cry. How else do you expect us to get relief? Maybe some anger and sadness mixed with vodka or Quaaludes, the perfect aperitif. It's time to rise like our ancestors of old, to find your pack, your tribe, other men that don't subscribe to outdated stereotypes that we are toxic or weak. See, that's not how you describe a conscious king, a righteous warrior, the leaders of the new revolution, the evolution of manhood that's intoxicating, fascinating, captivating, and dare I say, upgrading the DNA of our sons and daughters, because we no longer hurt our children. The men of old will receive their orders, and they will be extinct soon, a species no longer able to create disorder. We are rising like the water under the new moon. We are howling wolves singing to the same tune. We see beyond the veil of illusion and know that it is us that bend. There is no spoon. The women yell, "Where are all the good men?" We are leveling up our armor, and we are coming out of the shadows at high noon, not alone, not afraid, and not ready to retreat, but to face ourselves deeply and the demons that we will meet, because a man must conquer himself first. It's the noblest of all victories. Backed by thousands of other men, this is how we change history. So you thought you were just listening to a podcast. Well, this is a not so subtle clue. There is no podcast. There is only you.
Holy shit, dude. Keith is giving you a round of applause, man. I'm sitting here with chills down my spine, man.
I chilled the entire time. I'm still chilled right now. Fuck, that's so good, dude. So beautiful. Really, really, really beautiful. Like, it's, listening to you read it, right? I feel your passion and your conviction, right? And that just feels strong and beautiful. Hearing the words, and how the rhythm of them, how they rhyme, boom, beautiful. But the content and the message and like what it does to my brain and where my brain goes as I hear the words coming in. It's like, it's really inspiring and it's really beautiful. And it's really clarifying to put these like feelings that I have and passions that I have into words, but not just words, like this eloquence and beauty to the words of what I'm feeling is, I think, a big part of why I connect so much with your poetry. It just hits me on so many different levels, man. It's really, really, really beautiful.
Thank you, brother.
Robert, what does this poem mean to you, man?
You know, it's just this, it's almost like an ode to this work, right? Calling men to action, letting them know that there is a unification happening, letting them know that our ancestors, our forefathers, our fathers, our grandfathers, even, right? Those that are close to us, they did the best that they can, right? But we can cut that string and we can start anew. And this is a revolution that's happening. And I get this question from women a lot. I think I put it in the poem. Like, women are like, where are the good men? And it's like, they're waiting for us. And this revolution, it is happening. And this poem is like a call to those men who might not be aware of it. Go find your tribe, right? I found the mastermind. Fantastic. My guys in my men's group found Raised by Men, which is the name of my group, right? There's plenty of chapters out there that are available and open and would welcome these men with open arms. And it's time we unite. That's how we change the world. It takes a village.
God, one of the things I love at everything you're saying is, for years, Brian and I have been talking about on this podcast that personal development on your own is slow, shallow, incomplete, right? You're just listening to a podcast. You're just, reading the next book. You're trying to trudge along on your own. And, I love your line of, you thought you were just listening to a podcast. Like, this is a call to raise consciousness. And, you even said something like wolves howling at the same moon, right? Like lone wolves coming out of hiding, and just all these images that kind of blasted through my mind as you were going through your poem. And your poems require, I feel like I need to savor them more. I need to see them in written word because, as you go through it, there's so many things I want to hang on and sink my teeth into. And so my question for you, man, is like, are there parts of the poem where you feel really lit up? Like parts where like your heart or your warrior comes to life?
Yeah. I mean, look, I said there's no need to suffer in silence anymore, right? Like that's sort of the crux of this, is like, there are men waiting for you that want you to come and join this brotherhood. And I know what it's like to suffer alone. It sucks, man. It's not easy. And we bite our tongues as men because we're expected to deal with it, right? Society tells us, suck it up, dust yourself off, stop crying, right? Be a man. And that's not the reality, because we're human beings and we need to feel everything and we need to alchemize everything in order to really step into our power. So suffering in silence and suffering alone and going through this process alone is scary and it's slow. And that really resonates with me, because the poems I'm reading today, that's what's been inspiring me, right? I'm writing about men's work. That's my poetry right now. In the past, if you read my poems from like 5 years ago, it's sad. It's very confusing, right? You literally will feel my pain. You will feel my loneliness. So I understand what it's like to go from being lonely to being part of a tribe of conscious men. I didn't know it existed, And if I may share from our last immersion, I shared this with my group last night. I had Steve Wilt in my group. And I said, we're working towards this initiative called Live In, which I'm sure you're going to share with the community at one point, Dom, where the phrase is, it ain't weak to speak. That's the motto, right?
Yeah. Live In is a mental health charity. And then they're huge in Australia, but we're going to be partnering up with Live In the United States for our 100 push-up challenge.
Yeah. So I love the motto that it ain't weak to speak. And when I look back at our last immersion a couple of weeks ago, you hired a photographer and he was there just to film everything that was going on. And at one point during the immersion, he drops all of his equipment. We're in the middle of a session and he's like, I need this. Yeah. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I didn't know this existed.
Yeah.
And I went home to my wife last night and I cried and I told her about everything that you're doing here. And I want to be part of it some way, somehow. And I just can't imagine how many men are out there that aren't aware of these circles and aren't aware of how loving these men are out there. Like, I didn't know that. The men in my family weren't loving. They loved me. I knew that, but I didn't feel it. And I wonder how many men are listening that are actually aware that you could find real brotherhood that are probably very unlike the friends that you grew up with or the men in your family. That doesn't mean those men are bad. It just means they're not doing the work. So if you want to elevate, join the tribe.
Yeah, that speaks to a part of your poem that like really grabbed me. I mean, a lot of what you said grabbed me, but what stood out was like, as men, we're no longer, and I'm going to get emotional talking about it, no longer going to hurt children. And like, I love that like declaration of like, the fucking line is right here. Like, so many generations before us, we were taught, with the belt and with the spoon or with your hand or spankings and that torch has been passed on for so long. And, I understand the desire. You don't want your kid to do a certain thing. So you have to put a punishment, and the punishment is physical and it gets them to stop doing that thing. But the evolution and the awareness of the damage that is done, the shrapnel that child's emotions and life gets, ripped apart by. There's another way. There are other ways, and getting into these circles and talking about it and evolving and growing so that we can be fathers who guide our kids with love instead of pain. And when we're driven by like passion and connection instead of fear, it sings to me. So when, that part of the poem, just beautiful. Thank you.
Beautifully said, Keith. Robert, before we move on to your next poem, I do have to check. Did you rhyme motif and aperitif?
I caught that. Wait, I think there was one more F in there. I think there was a 3F. Belief, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where it comes from. It's not me, though.
I was going to say that, like if you needed evidence that this thing is being channeled, look no further than motif and aperitif. I know.
I don't use those words. I never use that.
I don't think you've ever heard of either of those two words. That's incredible, man. Okay, so this next poem, if that first one was kind of like inspirational, it's almost a, hey, come join this movement, come take a look at what you're part of. This next one is, I would say, it's even more confronting. There's a darkness here that we're taking a look at, that you're challenging us to take a look at, and also for men to rise up and show their teeth when it comes to injustice. So I don't want to take too many more words here. I'd rather you describe your poem, but this one has some bite to it.
Yeah, I won't spend too much time describing it. I guess I'll just reiterate what I said earlier, which is like, we have to take personal responsibility for our stuff. I believe we come into this life with contracts, soul contracts. We're not really aware of them, but if we dive real deep, we could actually touch it a little bit. And those contracts could be our trauma. And that trauma could be directly something we remember or something we don't remember or something that happened in this lifetime or previous lifetimes. The point is, we have to alchemize it. We have to transmute it, and we have to clear our bodies of this, right? And there's an ancestral shit that really lives within us, especially from a patriarchal standpoint. So that's the context of this poem. It's called Running in the Night. Here we go. One man is every man. And let's be honest, men, we haven't done so well. You see, I know there's a heaven above, but here on earth, we have created hell. Now, I know each man in this room have done their part to bringing themselves back to healthy masculinity, but that doesn't mean we aren't carrying ancestral shit, racism, misogyny, abuse, bigotry. And it's not just the men in our families, it's every man alive and dead. We are all connected by a single thread. All of it lives inside each and every one of us. The abuse of our own power is too expansive to even discuss. But let me see if I could do it justice, because that's just what we need in order to adjust. There are our children, little girls and boys being traded for forced sex and labor. $150 billion a year industry, but this headline no longer runs favor. The third most trafficked commodity, but the only one that breathes, the world's fastest growing crime, the cities of God seethe. Where are the men with fire in their heart who stand for children traded like spare parts? Where are the rabid dogs ready to protect their own, who stand in front of their families and maintain their homes? Because one man's child is every man's child. Where are the warriors who are ready to fight? Where are the men who hold the light for all the children who are afraid of the dark? Where are the men who bite harder than they bark? Where are the men of God who slay demons with his sword? Where are those who serve the Lord? Where are the men who are fathers to every child on earth? I'm putting together a party, one that involves a search. Who said the righteous don't fight? Anger is a gift if it's used right. There are lost children out there running in the night. God told me they need to come home now. I told him we will be a light. Then there are the women that we suppressed and objectified. We want them to be our little sex objects, but also purified. An impossible task, so we create fantasies we play out in secrecy. Where are the conscious kings? Where is the chivalry, the decency? We have protected our inequality in fear of their powerful ascent. We took what we wanted from them. There was no such thing as consent. Where are the men that stand up and protect our daughters and wives? For a woman is more than her sexuality. Her body is the carrier of all lives. It's time we protect her, for she is the embodiment of love. She holds the light. It's time we stop hurting our lionesses. It's about time we fight for them, their beauty, their softness, the essence we can only behold. Where are the men who will stand up and take the pain of men of old? Where are the men who support women and father their king? Where are the warriors who are fit for the service within? Who are the men who will soon be those who are looked upon when the unconscious men before us are long gone? I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the sick leading the blind. How men can act this way. We still refer to ourselves as mankind. How we act also refined when atrocities are happening right behind our own very eyes and our ears are only tuned to the cries of our own design. God told me that we mustn't hurt his sons and daughters. He said we must honor and protect them. This was his orders. I'm not a father in the biological sense, but I will be one day. In the meantime, I'm going hunting for some foul play. Men have misplaced their anger for generations. What if we all channeled it into these abominations? The pain men have caused lives inside us and it needs to be released. This is a call to all men. It's time to awaken that sleeping beast.
It's powerful shit, dude. I love every child is every man's child, like this is our responsibility and this is how we change the world. And I had tears in my eyes the whole time. It just feels like speaking to a primal part of me that is connected to all of us. Like I feel like too much of my headspace is filled with, work and trying to make money and bullshit that doesn't fucking matter. And listening to your poem, it just connects you to like what we should be fucking focused on and where our power and energy, should be focused. It's fucking moving, man. Really moving.
Yeah.
Thank you, brother.
Robert, what's this poem about for you, man?
Oh, man, there's so many themes in there, but I think the main thing is I wrote it there was anger, for the suffering in the world. And this is not like all men are bad, right? I'm not saying that, right? The problems in the world are much more complicated than men caused everything. But at the root of this, a lot of issues we are behind, like who's doing this child trafficking, right? Any big business, any big industry, men are going to be behind. And nobody talks about it. We're talking about vaccine shots for the last year and a half. I'm not saying that's not important, but what are we talking about here? If we were to prioritize the world's biggest problems, like to me, children being traded behind people's backs for money, it breaks my heart. So I was angry. A lot of this stuff towards women too. It's like, we need to return to love, but first we got to correct the wrongs in the world. And in order to alleviate the suffering, we got to get a little bit mad. And going back to the previous poem, it's like, we got to deal with our shit first, right? Because then it could be misplaced anger. I'm talking about righteous anger. And when I would talk to my therapist about a year ago, and I told him about the situation where I was angry. And he goes, if you're angry, you're wrong. And I said, that's bullshit. I don't believe that. I think any emotion is there for a reason. And if someone's messing with my kid or tries to kidnap my kid or steal my kid or whatever, you bet your ass you're going to see the lion come out. Someone's going to pay. Now, I don't know what that looks like, but I just think about when you bring powerful men together collectively and you all put your attention towards one thing, what could happen?
Right. Robert, this is probably the third time, maybe fourth time I've heard this poem. And, the first time I heard it, the two things I heard the loudest were the child trafficking and then what men have been doing to women for generations. The more I've heard it, what I feel sits at the center of your poem is this call to use anger, which we've been using for destruction, and then to channel that anger, as you say, it can be a gift if used the right way to overcome these abominations. And, what this means for me is, and for anyone who's listening, you can make this personal to any injustice, right? Any abomination that you seek to stand up for. Robert's very clear, child trafficking is the thing you're speaking about here. Before we started recording, one of the abominations I'm standing up for is how young boys are taught to emotionally cripple themselves from a very early age. To use Bell Hooks's words from one of her books, we're taught to murder our own souls because it's not manly, it's not masculine, not allowed to cry, not allowed to show emotions. And I'm committing my entire life to channeling all the emotions I have, anger. I'm pushing all my chips into the middle of the table to say, before I'm gone here, I'm going to put a fucking dent in this injustice that starts at a very early age that then not only destroys the inner lives of men, but as you so eloquently captured in your poem, the downstream effect, right? The collateral damage that we can create when legions of men are walking around emotionally crippled and dead inside. We can do something about that, but only if we answer your call in the poem that you have here, Running in the Night, to harness our anger in a different way, to build the fire in our hearts like you talked about, and the men who want to bite harder than they bark around some of these issues. This is all really powerful stuff, man.
Yeah, I love that. I love what do you stand for? Okay. And what are you going to do about it?
Yep.
I think a lot of people stand for a lot of things and have really strong opinions, but fuck you doing about it? Where do you show up? How do you show up? What impact are you going to make on this world, or at least in your world, in your community?
Yeah, I think a lot about being an integrated man. I think a lot of this work that we're talking about today could be confusing to men that are new to it, because we talk about divine feminine, divine masculine, awakening the feminine, right? The way I look at it is being an integrated man or an integrated human. And anger is an emotion. And once in a while, we could tap into it just the way we could tap into sadness, right? So we're not supposed to avoid anything, really. If we're able to have the discernment to be able to play with our emotions, I think, Keith, you talk about the board of directors of emotions, right? Being able to connect with them at all times, then we are complete. But if we're never able to touch our anger, what does that say about us? We might be that nice guy that has no boundaries, that gets walked all over. So if I want to move somebody to do something, I might have to touch that fire within me. I don't think Martin Luther King was speaking from a place of softness, speaking from fire. That's why that speech, I Had a Dream, moves us. Try to listen to that and not get chills.
That's beautiful, man. Well, we've got one more here. And this is the very first poem that we heard come out of your mouth, man, which was, this was at the crescendo, the very end of our first in-person immersion together. And so we didn't know that Robert had any of this in him until he steps up and just kind of casually says, I wrote a little poem. I thought it was going to be 6 lines, a couple of really basic words strung together, rhymes, maybe.
Start off with roses are red, violets are blue,
that kind of
that's the best I got.
Right. And obviously you've gotten a flavor for the first 2 poems. I mean, these are soul shaking words that come from someplace really deep. So Robert, why don't you give us a heads up for what this third poem is about, and then we'll go into it.
Yeah. For me, this is I think about a lot of my friends who don't really understand the work that I'm doing here and the change I'm experiencing as part of this work. So it's sort of a conversation between myself, a man who stepped into this work, sees the tremendous and dramatic value of it, and someone who maybe has that old archaic way of looking at men's work, which is men don't speak, women do that type of thing. So it's me trying to explain this to another friend who's unaware and maybe resistant.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So here it goes. Someone asked me, what do we do in this mastermind? My answer was pretty simple, although not so refined. What do you mean, what do we do? We work on living to our potential. That's it, he said. Yeah, the rest is confidential. Why do you need a group for that? Can't you do that on your own? Nah. The lone wolf goes hungry when he dines alone. I don't see the point. Just work hard and do your best. Have you ever been lifted by 20 conscious men? This is the meaning of blessed. I don't get it, he said, but to each their own. This triggered me a bit, so I threw him a bone. You want to know what men's work is? Let me give you an idea. It's a mirrored reflection that exposes your fear. It shows you where you stand in the company of men. It reveals your insecurities time and time again. It is a laboratory for both discipline and surrender. It is the arena where we train to be strong and tender. It's a place where we take our struggles and pain and leave with a little less than when we originally came. It's a place where we learn to trust our brothers, a place where we discuss our fathers and our mothers. It's a place to drop off our past shame and guilt, a place to tear down the protective walls that we built. But you're not convinced. I see it on your face. And that's okay. I'm not here to sell you. That's not my place. But don't say you're okay when I see the pain you hold inside. And brother, trust me, I know it's easy to hide. I did it for decades. The shadows were my home. It felt safe there for a while, but I was sad and alone. I was afraid to be seen and come out of my cave. But there was a hurt boy inside, and he had to be saved. He was told to get back in the fight and was punished if he cried. He was told he was weak if he couldn't provide. He was filled with anger, and he was afraid to express. So he swallowed it down and let it suppress. See, he was numb to the world and eventually imploded. Idle emotions like shotgun bullets that were locked and loaded. But the dust settled, and on the other side were thousands of men with their arms open wide. They said they were fathers of men, and they stood there united. And if you are ready to join this tribe, you are cordially invited. So I joined the circle of fire, and my heart went aflame, and I burnt all the remnants of my sorrow and shame. Then we got to work. This goes beyond the realm of explanation. So I'll leave it there, my friend. And perhaps there's temptation to honor your fear and take the path of least resistance, to learn to live in your essence and not just your existence, to feel your manhood more than just below your waist, to feel it in your blood, your heart, and in God's heavenly grace. Finally, I looked my friend deep in the eyes, something outside his comfort zone. And I said, I love you, my friend, but trust me, you can't be all of you alone.
Oh, man. Well, you got the hat trick of making me cry 3 times in a row.
That was my only goal today.
Oh, man. Again, it speaks so much to my soul. What I'm wondering is is that so impactful for me because this is the life I'm living? Like, you're just describing exactly what I'm feeling inside. And that's why we're in the same group. And that's why we're in such alignment. Like, when you pull a guy off the street and you bring him in here and you read him that poem, does that wash over his face? Is he's like, I don't know what the fuck these guys are talking about? Or does that pierce any armor? Because that just goes straight to my depths. And I wonder what I wonder what listeners are thinking right now.
Yeah, Robert, what's been your experience with that? I don't know if you've had a chance to read that to anyone, but maybe even the guy that you wrote this about.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that's such a good point, Keith. It's funny, when Dom invited me to this podcast, I thought about that. I'm like, I wonder if this is going to resonate with the guys, right? As I said in the first poem, this is a portal. So anybody that found Dom's podcast could have found thousands of other podcasts. So that's not a coincidence, right? So I believe that the people that need to find this work will find the work. And maybe the poem is sort of an invitation or something that expedites that process for them. But if you're not even on the radar of this, like if I read it to people that don't even know this work existed or aren't interested, I don't know if it would stick. I don't think so.
Where I might differ on that, Robert, is in my experience with men who are not yet ready for this work, you can still pierce the armor and then plant a seed that may take time to grow. there are so many moments in your poem where there's the jab. You probably created dozens of hole piercings where you've gone in and planted the seeds that over time, a guy, when he experiences life situations where he feels lonely or, he's hit rock bottom in work or his relationships, like those words may ring out a little more clearly at that point in time. And he may get more curious around these concepts of what does it mean to come to a group of men and leave with a little less pain, than when I came, to borrow a line from your poem. What does it mean that this work is confidential? What are you guys doing behind the scenes, right? That allows you to feel that brotherhood. What does it mean when you say, I can't be all of myself alone? And like those curiosities in this present moment, if a guy's not ready, he may not be able to grasp that, but there will be moments in the future for a lot of these men that will allow those questions to sink in more deeply. It will take on a new meaning. And some guys who have been seeing what I'm doing for years now, who might have mocked it, 3 or 4 years ago, are the same guys showing up and signing over big checks to do this work now. I definitely want to make sure the potency of the words and this gift that you've created, whether or not it lands this moment, it has an effect.
Yeah, I like your answer much better. It's much more obvious. Yeah. It does make me think of when I shared that poem the first time. It was the first time I ever shared a poem out loud or at all. And everything inside me was like, don't do it. And then I did it. And the reaction was, I'll never forget it, right? The guys went crazy. I think that when you share this type of art and there's a message within it, you yourself have to present it, right? Because we are modeling this work. So if I just leave it out there and I throw it on Instagram and people read it, it might touch some people, reach some people, pierce the armor, as you say it. But if I go out there and I read it and I'm embodying the work that we're doing here, then I think it becomes really powerful. So pushing myself to the edge beyond that comfort zone and sharing these messages like I'm doing today, I think is really that missing link to make this stick.
Yeah, definitely. And the way that you're reading these now, I mean, your embodiment of them, and I can see Keith's face going, because we've heard you read these poems multiple times. And, at first you were just kind of reading them, but there's a full, like you are wearing it like an outfit and it fits you so well, dude. And I can't wait to hear you tell it the dozenth time and then the 50th time and the 100th time. I'm going to be there for a lot of them. You know what I mean, man? We're taking the shit on stage. Like one of my big dreams for this next year is to find a stage in New York City where every single month, at least once a month, we can bring the men of the mastermind on stage to tell stories around the work that we're doing here. And I have this vision of you stepping on at every one of those stages and sharing one of your poems, right? And bringing the house down. So just the way that you're living it, the way that you're speaking it, it stirs something in me emotionally in a way that I have yet to be able to find that place in my own words. When we're even doing these podcasts, like I feel like I've been effective in getting some guys to kind of bridge that gap between their mind and their soul. But when I listen to one of your poems, it just goes straight to the soul. And that is a gift that you have, my friend. And the fact that like you are just starting to share this shit is remarkable. And I see book deals and, stages in your future, man. And that's not hyperbole.
Oh man, I appreciate that so much. Adam, I mean, you really pushed me on this, right? Like as we're having this conversation, I'm thinking about all the listeners that might be in the shadows. That's a couple of themes in my poems, right? I use the word shadow a lot and calling men to come out of their shadows. That can mean anything, including a talent. How many men are afraid to share their talent? Keith, you were talking about, I can't draw shit. I can't draw a stick figure. And then before this call, you show us these amazing drawings that you suddenly just pulled out of your ass. So all these stories that we tell ourselves, or this coyness that we have that we're not good enough to get on stage, even a proverbial stage, and show ourselves, right? It's really important because I was deathly afraid. I probably have hundreds of poems that I've written, and I only shared it after I felt this community of men knowing that it was a safe place. No matter what happened, I know I was safe.
And now you're on a podcast broadcasting it to the world.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yep. These are the early stages, man. We'll look back when Robert's traveling the world, doing this on stages, everyone's cheering his name. Keith, man, Any final words for Robert?
Just don't forget me when you're up on stage. I want front row tickets, man. I was here early. You know what I mean? Like VIP pass is something.
Yeah, I was expecting you to throw your underpants on stage.
Guaranteed.
Extra medium underpants coming your way, Robert. Robert, brother, in the show notes, we're going to link the contact information for you. But for the kinds of men that you're doing coaching with, who is your ideal man that you want to work with?
Really any man that's genuinely interested in going inwardly. I think God has become a big word for people, sometimes a dirty word. Like, we're creating all these variations. We have to call it source in the universe and all this stuff because we're just afraid to say God, But to me, it's a process of self-exploration. It's one thing I learned to do well. I used to be just an avid reader and consumer, and there's nothing wrong with that. But at some point, something just told me to stop and reverse some of these conditionings and pressurizations in my body through breath work, meditation, silence, and solitude. And what I found was a whole new world. And it's a world that speaks to me and speaks through me, like you saw today with this poetry. So anyone that's interested in, leveling up, being part of a tribe, but also like connecting with their own spirituality, I think that's where I come into play, is that little nugget.
Most definitely, man. And the best way for them to get in touch with you is
robertjosephcoaching.com or RJ Coaching NYC on Instagram.
Got that, man. Those two are going to be linked in the show notes. Dude, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your gifts with the world. And also specifically for writing the first poem specifically for our audience. That truly means a lot to me as someone who pours his heart and soul into this work, and to our audience to know that you came with that gift specifically for us means a lot. And we love you, bud.
My pleasure. Love you too. And I hope this resonated with your listeners.
Oh, guys, if your fire is burning like mine is after hearing those poems from Robert, and you are looking for a place to put that motivation and that energy, then I'm going to remind you one more time that the link to register for the 100 consecutive push-up challenge is right there in the show notes. It is a 60-day journey from hundreds of men around the world who are training their bodies and minds to do 100 consecutive push-ups in a row. This is a physical and a mental challenge that requires no more than 20 minutes of training a day. You're going to get a chance to get exposed to men around this world who are in this community doing this work to help you transcend whatever limitations you have in your mind. I sure know that after hearing Robert's speeches, I'm going to be taking that mindset, that call to rise up into every one of my practice sessions. So register with the link in the show notes, and we'll see you there on January 1st.